LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the March 26th edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I picked out the weekend's 18 best, most newsworthy clips for what should be a really educational, informative, fair use media criticism and political analysis show for you all tonight. I'll start, as usual, with some political comedy clips just from Real Time with Bill Maher this week. And then, as usual, most of my clips will come from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States. You can see the two subtopics I'm covering listed and described down in the video description. If you're watching this as a recorded show, you can find time indexes down there to skip between the topics. I also have a link to this clip list for both the live show and the recorded show, where you can look at my notes for my 18 clips that I refer to, and you can sort of skip between the clips or look for the one that most interests you if you can understand what my notes mean, which, I don't know, maybe you can, maybe you can't. But the two big topics are two big ways that Donald Trump lost this week. He lost bigly, as I said in the title of the video. He lost bigly on TRUMPCARE or RYANCARE or repeal and replace Obamacare or whatever you want to call it. And he also had some really bad news on Russia. I'm going to show first Bill Maher talking about how much news there was this week in his monologue on Friday night. And this is just about 30 seconds long. There's also a clip down in the video description to the entire monologue, free on YouTube from the HBO channel on Real Time. Here's 30 seconds of that talking about how much news there was this week in this clip.
But, you know, there was so much news this week. This was only the end of the week, the healthcare thing. But besides TRUMPCARE, there was the Supreme Court hearings we had. There was the Russia news. We're burying the lead with that. The Keystone Pipeline got okayed today. There was so much news. I'm going nuts trying to keep up. I've got the hearings on TV. I got the president on Twitter. I got Kellyanne on the microwave.
So that was Bill Maher sort of rounding up some of the news of the week, some of which wasn't even covered on the Sunday shows. The whole Keystone Pipeline, that didn't even come up. Like I said, the two main topics I'm covering are the death of Obamacare and the continuing revelations about the ties between the Trump campaign and the Trump administration and Russia, and what James Comey said this week and what Devin Nunes did this week. And I'll get to all the Russia stuff at the end. But first, I want to do some more clips on healthcare, and I want to show one more clip from Bill Maher's monologue. He actually has a little tie-in with Russia that I think is funny at the beginning, and then he talks about all the problems with the Republican healthcare bill that failed on Friday, which I will discuss with you after we watch that together here.
Oh, this looks bad for Trump. Oh. Yeah, no, it does. You know how Putin feels about failure. That's right. But no, this healthcare thing went down because of the Freedom Caucus, that's the artist formerly known as the Tea Party, in Congress. Paul Ryan wrote a healthcare bill that somehow covered fewer people than just repealing Obamacare. And replaced it with nothing. And it still wasn't good enough for the Freedom Caucus. It's like if you wrote a highway bill that made all the bridges fall down. And they said, yeah, but that only kills drivers. What about people at home? I mean, it is amazing what happened during the week. The Freedom Caucus kept taking away more things, more health care benefits, to make it more attractive to psychopaths. In the last version, they had cut hospitalization, doctor visits, maternity, mental health, lab tests, prescriptions, emergency room visits. Their version of health care was, if you like your doctor, go fuck yourself.
So that's a pretty good line there at the end. I like that, their version of healthcare, if you like your doctor. And I like the line, especially at the beginning, where he tied it into the Russia scandal, where Trump's failure might get him in trouble with his master, Vladimir Putin. And like I said, the Russia scandal's the second topic. If you can't wait for that and you're watching this as a recorded show, you could click down to the time index to the Russia topic. But I think the Obamacare topic is also really important. It's a major loss, a huge loss that no administration has lost something this big, this early in their term. And Donald Trump really, I don't know, maybe he has some like master plan still, but as I heard one of the pundits say, this was sort of the test to see, is Donald Trump crazy or is he crazy like a fox? And it turns out he's just crazy. He doesn't have a great plan. I'm not sick of winning yet. I don't know about you, but I want to show how 3 different networks covered the week and, the big loss for Trump. First, a really in context roundup of Trump losses from the last 65 days of his administration from NBC's Meet the Press. Then a shorter one from ABC, which also emphasizes the loss. And then one that's a little bit more optimistic, as you might expect from Fox News Sunday. I'll play that as the third one. Here's the NBC Meet the Press roundup of just how bigly this loss was for Donald Trump this week. This is about 4 minutes. It's the longest of the 3 news reports on Trump losing big, as you might expect from NBC over here.
This was the most consequential week in Donald Trump's young presidency. In the span of just 5 days, Mr. Trump's credibility with voters and his clout with Congress were both dealt serious blows. On Monday, the director of the FBI, James Comey, put to rest any question that Donald Trump was wiretapped by President Obama. He wasn't. More importantly, Mr. Comey confirmed the FBI is investigating possible links between the Trump campaign and the Russian government. By Friday, House Republicans abruptly had to pull the bill to repeal and replace Obamacare, an embarrassing acknowledgement that they didn't have the votes despite full control of the House, Senate, and the White House. The defeat raises questions about the ability of President Trump and his party to win on anything big. In a short time in office, the president's travel ban has been blocked twice. His budget plan is stuck in the mud. The Russia investigation is widening, and his political capital is shrinking. And despite several days of behind-the-scenes negotiating and arm-twisting on health care, the president's public push to sell the bill was, in a word, lackluster. And it turns out the art of the deal president couldn't close.
I'm disappointed. I'm a little surprised, to be honest with you.
For 7 years, it's been the promise that United Republicans, repeated over and over again on the campaign trail by Donald Trump.
The first thing we're going to do is repeal and replace Obamacare.
Immediately repealing and replacing Obamacare.
Immediately repealing and replacing the disaster known as Obamacare.
But on Friday, House Republicans, facing a revolt by more than 30 conservatives and moderates, pulled their bill to repeal and replace Obamacare from the floor, leaving President Obama's chief domestic achievement intact.
Yeah, we're going to be living with Obamacare for the foreseeable future.
All week, Republicans promised that President Trump's personal political capital would bring the bill across the finish line.
And the reason I feel so good about this is because the president has become a great closer.
He's the closer.
He is the closer. He's a tremendous closer.
Now, the defeat of Mr. Trump's first legislative effort raises questions about the negotiating skills that he promised would break through gridlock in Washington.
If you can't make a good deal with a politician, then there's something wrong with you. You're certainly not very good.
And it damages the reputation of House Speaker Paul Ryan, the self-described policy wonk that Republicans drafted to push through conservative legislation. And it raises questions about the party's overall ability to govern.
We were a 10-year opposition party where being against things was easy to do.
Quite frankly, I think we had a group of people that are traditionally no on everything.
The bill's defeat is also an early victory for grassroots activism on the left, after angry town halls put pressure on moderate lawmakers to vote no. Now, Obamacare's survival or collapse lies with Mr. Trump, a president who vowed to dismantle it. On Friday, he told the New York Times, quote, he was pleased to have it all behind him. It's enough already. Though the president tried to pin some blame on Democrats,
The losers are Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, because now they own Obamacare.
Mr. Trump also implied he might eventually have to work with Democrats to fix the law. But it's unlikely to happen anytime soon. Eager to talk about anything else, the president spent his weekly address talking not about health care, not about tax reform, not about infrastructure, but about exploring space.
This week, in the company of astronauts, I was honored to sign the NASA Transition Authorization Act right into law.
The blame game is in full swing. The president tweeted this just a few minutes ago. Democrats are smiling in D.C. that the Freedom Caucus, with the help of Club for Growth and Heritage, have saved Planned Parenthood and Obamacare. Well, some Republicans are blaming the White House. Others are pointing to Speaker Ryan. And as you see there, still others, like the president, is pinning the fault on the Freedom Caucus. Joining me now is a former member.
So I'll get to the blame game in just a minute, because several of the interview clips coming up are on the blame game and how the president first blamed Democrats, which is nonsensical, and then blamed the Freedom Caucus, the Tea Party Republicans in the House of Representatives. But I thought that report from NBC's Meet the Press put the Trump loss this week in the context of all his losses the best, if that's what you're looking for, if you want to see how Trump is losing bigly in the first 66 days of his administration. NBC is obviously the place to go, and they spent 4 minutes building that great context and showing all the ways that Donald Trump is a big loser. So thank you, NBC, for showing me that. That's something I enjoy watching. Maybe some of you do. You can let me know down in the comment section. The next clip I want to show is from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, which also showed Trump as a big loser, but they just showed it in like a minute, and they put it in a little bit of context, but it's more about Trump, being humble and in retreat. I don't know, was Donald Trump really humble? That seems a little bit of a stretch, but that's what ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, that was their take on what happened this morning with this introduction from George Stephanopoulos himself over here.
For all of you who had a rough week, just think about how President Trump must feel after the worst week of his young presidency. It began Monday morning with a direct rebuke from the FBI director. By close of business Friday, that body blow delivered by his own party. In the face of certain defeat, the president chose to retreat. And in the Oval Office, a humble Trump talked lessons learned.
We all learned a lot. We learned a lot about loyalty. We learned a lot about the vote-getting process. We learned a lot about some very arcane rules in, obviously, both the Senate and in the House.
But has President Trump learned the right lessons? Does he and his team have what it takes to turn things around? All presidents lose fights in Congress. But before this week, no president in our lifetimes has lost his first big one. A loss compounded by the fact that Republicans control both houses of Congress. A loss that comes after a series of missteps that raise serious questions about the president's competence and credibility. This week, we're going to break down what it all means, analyze the fallout, and what's next for President Trump and his agenda. The two men who led the fight against Trump's bill, House Freedom Caucus Chair Mark Meadows and top Senate Democrat Chuck Schumer, are standing by. First, let's bring in our analyst, Chief Political Analyst Matthew Dowd here at ABC. How big a blow?
It's huge. As I said earlier in the week, this health...
So yeah, I wanted to play it through the Matthew Dowd. He's a moderate Republican who worked for George W. Bush. And he said it was a huge loss. It was it's the Trump administration, I think he went on to say, is like some Jenga game where you pull out the Obamacare repeal replace and the whole thing comes tumbling down. So ABC was no less harsh than NBC. They just did it in a shorter period of time there, and there wasn't quite as much context, but it was still a huge loss. And the only thing I would quibble with, like I said before I showed the clip, was Donald Trump really humbled? Was he acting humbled? I don't know about that. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. And now, like I said, I want to compare those two reports with the Fox News report, which did also talk about it being, a big loss, and especially Chris Wallace at the beginning. Not so much of the context of all the other losses, not what you heard from George Stephanopoulos there, that is like the first time a modern president has had such a huge loss at the beginning of his term. But then it goes to this Kevin Corke report from Fox News. He's the Fox News reporter, and he calls it a setback. And the context he puts it in, unlike the NBC report we watched, this is the context of all the, things that the Trump administration still is looking to the future towards doing, tax reform, and, you'll see it all. And I think it's, even though they do call it a big loss for Trump, I think they give it a little bit more of an optimistic, rosy spin than the other two, as you might expect from Fox News. as I will discuss with you after we watch that clip together here.
Washington. Obamacare is here to stay. House GOP leaders facing a revolt by Republican members pulled their plan to repeal and replace it. The result, a damaging defeat for Donald Trump, a consummate deal-maker, in the first big negotiation of his presidency. In a moment, we'll drill down into what went wrong and what it means for the rest of the president's agenda with White House Chief of Staff Reince Priebus and Congressman Jim Jordan, a leader of the House Freedom Caucus. But first, let's bring in Fox News correspondent Kevin Corke at the White House. Kevin.
Chris, it certainly makes sense for the White House to move on to what could best be described as political low-hanging fruit, jobs, regulatory reform. And we certainly expect to hear a great deal more about those issues this week as the White House tries to reassure the president's rattled base following Friday's setback on health care. In fact, the president seemed to look forward in a tweet that he had just yesterday talking about Obamacare, as you said, saying that it would ultimately explode and that he would eventually get together with just his party and perhaps even others who might want to be involved in all that and try to come up with a plan to repeal and replace for the people. He said, do not worry. And that was the message, by the way, taken to West Virginia by his vice president, Mike Pence. He met, of course, with business leaders on Saturday, and he said the fight to repeal and replace is not over yet.
Even though Congress isn't ready to do it yet, President Trump will not rest, will not relent until we repeal and replace Obamacare.
Meantime, Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin will be in the headlines this week as he tries to tackle the next page of the Trump White House playbook. That's tax reform. U.S. corporate tax rate among the highest in the world. The president has said he'd like to cut the corporate rate down to 15% from 35%. And he has repeatedly promised to reduce the tax burden on the American family. But, Chris, it's also important to point out that there is some concern among GOP lawmakers that given Friday's fiasco on Obamacare, the road ahead on tax reform could ultimately be even more complicated, especially when you consider the incredible number of competing stakeholders that can make what happened last week look like child's play moving forward. Chris?
Kevin Corke reporting from the White House. Kevin, thanks for that.
So, like I said, I think the Fox News report did sort of frame the Trump loss differently, even though they did call it a big loss. They framed it in terms of what's going to go right for Trump in the future, what's on the horizon. I think it was a little bit more optimistic. You can tell me if you agree with me down in the comment section. I want to move on to a couple questions that I thought were fairly confrontational from Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday as the Fox News host, who the only one who got to question Reince Priebus. And as usual, you can go down into the video description. There's a link to the entire Fox News Sunday program. I think you can watch the entire Reince Priebus interview. I only have a few clips from it. This is one of the ones where they're playing the blame game, where Chris Wallace asks Reince Priebus about how Donald Trump can possibly blame the Democrats for the failure of TRUMPCARE or RYANCARE, whatever you want to call it, when they never reached out to Democrats, never tried to compromise with Democrats, and he has kind of a ridiculous answer. But I do have a criticism of the camera work on this clip, which I will discuss with you after we watch that clip from Fox News Sunday on the health care loss by Donald Trump this morning here.
He reacted to the defeat of repeal and replace on Friday by blaming Democrats. Here he is.
We had no Democrat support. We had no votes from the Democrats. They weren't going to give us a single vote.
But Reince, the president never reached out to Democrats. You never offered Democrats a compromise. So how can you blame Democrats for this?
Well, I mean, look, Obamacare, as we know, is imploding and it is exploding, and every other adjective you can provide, it's going south. And it would be nice to get some Democrats on board. But you're right. At the end of the day, I believe that it's time for the party to start governing, and I think that's important. I also think, though, that Democrats can come to the table as well. And if you look at what the president said in the Oval just after that comment, he said, you know, perhaps it's time for us to start talking to some moderate Democrats as well and come up with, you know, a bipartisan solution. I do think that there are Republicans this weekend, Chris, that are scrambling. I think there are people in the Freedom Caucus and the Tuesday group, and for those listeners, that's the moderate group, that are starting to talk about what the next steps are in order to prevent an implosion of Obamacare. But the president's also said that when Obamacare does ultimately explode, which it will, we are going to be prepared to lead again, and if Democrats come on board with a plan down the road, we'll welcome that.
Okay, I want to talk about that in a second, but the president, I don't know if you even know this, has been tweeting this morning, and I want to put up a tweet. I see the look in your eye.
No, I've seen
You do know this one. He said this morning, Democrats are smiling in D.C. that the Freedom Caucus, with the help of Club for Growth and Heritage, two conservative think tanks, have saved Planned Parenthood and Obamacare. So he seems to be putting it right on the right wing, the hardline conservatives in your own party.
Well, I think the president's 100% correct, and he hits the bullseye in that tweet like he often does. We can't be chasing the perfect all the time. I mean, sometimes you have to take the good and put it in your pocket and take the win. And we have a two-party system in this country. You know, we're not Italy. We don't have 12 different parties where you have the super conservatives, the kind of conservatives, the moderates, and everyone else in between, and everyone fits nicely into one package. We have one party in the Republican Party and one in the Democrat Party. And the Republican Party came up with a package. The president met with over 120 members of the House. There was more love shown to outside groups by this White House, whether it was Vice President Pence, Mick Mulvaney, Tom Price, Steve Bannon, myself, Mark Short. I mean, the point is the diverse group of people working the halls of Congress, including the leadership in Congress. I think it's time for our folks to come together. And I also think it's time to potentially get a few moderate Democrats on board as well.
I'm going to get to the Democrats in a second.
So, like I said before I showed the clip, I do have one criticism of the camera work in that last clip, which is Chris Wallace was talking about how when he started talking about this tweet this morning from Donald Trump, about blaming the Freedom Caucus for the failure of TRUMPCARE or RYANCARE or whatever you want to call it. I keep saying that. He said, you know, when I see in your face that maybe you haven't seen this, and they didn't show Reince Priebus's face. They should have had the camera right on Reince Priebus's face when they said, by the way, have you seen the latest tweet? In fact, last night, one of the reasons I started the show late last night, I was at the Patton Oswalt comedy show in San Francisco. It's my birthday this week, so I stayed overnight in San Francisco to see Patton Oswalt last night. And he came out and started the show with, "Oh, I'm sorry. I'm glad you're all such in a great mood because have you seen the latest thing on Twitter?" And he said, "Oh no, there's nothing really on Twitter, but that's the world we live in now. That you can just destroy someone's world by making them think that there's some terrible thing on Twitter," because that seems to happen a lot these days. So I wanted to add in that criticism. Also, I don't think Chris Wallace did a good job questioning Reince Priebus, even though I said that he was somewhat confrontational, trying to get him to admit that Trump was blaming the wrong people for this loss. He didn't really contradict the whole thing about Obamacare imploding, which the Congressional Budget Office pretty much showed Obamacare is not imploding. It has some problems, and I'll show Bernie Sanders in a couple clips talking about what the problems are with Obamacare, but it's not imploding or exploding or any of those things. But I want to show one more clip from Reince Priebus's interview with Chris Wallace on the Obamacare topic, where it's another part of the blame game, where this weird thing happened yesterday where Donald Trump tweeted that everyone should watch Jeanine Pirro's show Justice with Jeanine on Fox News. I hate that show. She's pretty ridiculous, although she's fairly Trumpian in her views, and so I can see why Donald Trump is a fan. And then after Trump tweeted that everyone should watch her show, she started her show by calling for Paul Ryan to step down as Speaker of the House. This next clip I'm going to show starts with that Jeanine Pirro clip, and then Reince Priebus says, you'll see, well, he claims it's all a coincidence, as I will discuss with you after we watch that clip together. Over here.
Yesterday morning, the president tweeted this, and I want to put it up. Watch Judge Jeanine on Fox News at 9 p.m. Now, we all love Judge Jeanine on Fox News.
I do love Judge Jeanine.
But we were curious as to why he would call her out. Here was the start of her show last night.
My opening statement. Paul Ryan needs to step down as Speaker of the House.
Does the president want Paul Ryan to resign as Speaker?
Well, first of all, I will go on record. We do love Judge Jeanine, and so does the president. I think it was more coincidental, Chris. Come
on.
I did not talk to the president about the tweet. I'm just telling you the truth. There was no pre-planning here. The president.
Well, the president. But why would he say watch her, and then that's the first thing out of her mouth?
Because he loves Judge Jeanine, and he wanted to do Judge Jeanine a favor.
So does he want Paul Ryan to step down or no?
No, he doesn't. And he's talked to Paul Ryan yesterday for about an hour. He believes what he said in the Oval Office on Friday. He doesn't blame Paul Ryan. In fact, he thought Paul Ryan worked really hard. He enjoys his relationship with Paul Ryan, thinks that Paul Ryan's a great Speaker of the House. So none of that has changed. I think this is more of a personal relationship, the president helping out a friend.
And I assume the friend was Judge Jeanine, not Paul Ryan.
Well, both of them are. But as to the tweet,
but in terms of
but as to
helping
the tweet, yes.
Okay.
And
now I want to pick up on somebody else.
Sure.
So at least Chris Wallace had some incredulity when Reince Priebus claimed it was all a coincidence that Trump tweeted out, "Watch Judge Jeanine tonight," and then Judge Jeanine started her show with, "Paul Ryan should resign as Speaker of the House." But I guess they're friends. They both have like really shallow, reactionary views of like people who live in New York. I was actually born in New York. I have some relatives who still live there. I know about some of like the neoconservatives, or like there's this weird type of conservative in New York, which is, it's kind of different because New York City is such a liberal place. And anyway, I don't want to go into all of that, but I do find it kind of a strange coincidence, but I suppose it's possible because, I mean, although it might be some sort of like Machiavellian play where, Steve Bannon told Jeanine Pirro on the Justice with Jeanine show to call for because Bannon is the main rival to Reince Priebus, and the Breitbart site was very anti-Paul Ryan for a long time. But anyway, I want to move on to this next clip. Oh, before I do, I've been asking a lot of questions of the live viewers along the way. One of the things I asked was whether about that ABC clip where they said that Donald Trump was humble. I asked the viewers, do you really think Donald Trump was humble? Here's a comment from, I think it's Soul Watcher 72. No, he's not humble. He's never going to apologize or be humble. That also aligns with my analysis of Donald Trump, especially since he's like a 70-year-old man. And as people get older, I mentioned I just had a birthday. So I put myself in that category. Someone who's getting older, I know the older you get, the harder it is to change your ways. And I don't think Donald Trump is going to be changing his egotistical, narcissistic. Well, actually, I'm going to get into the egotistical, narcissistic thing in a few minutes with a Bill Maher clip and a couple Bill Maher clips on that. But I want to finish up the healthcare topic here. And the next clip is from the Director of the Office of Management and Budget for the Trump administration, Nick Mulvaney. I showed a couple clips of him last week. And the reason I wanted to show this clip is Donald Trump this morning, as you saw in that surprise tweet that Chris Wallace showed to Reince Priebus, that Reince Priebus apparently was prepared for, although we don't know for sure because they didn't put the camera on his face. Well, Donald Trump blamed the Freedom Caucus for the loss of TRUMPCARE, the American Health Care Act. And Nick Mulvaney, his Director of the Office of Management and Budget, was actually a big-time member of the Freedom Caucus. And so he is kind of on the spot, why his old compatriots, half of them did not vote for this bill, and that's one of the things that killed it. And of course, he can't blame the Freedom Caucus. He blames, Washington is more rotten than we thought it was. He blames Washington, but, it's actually the people in Washington, specifically the Republicans who control the House of Representatives. I mean, who else could be responsible? But you can see Nick Mulvaney's answer talking to Chuck Todd on NBC's Meet the Press this morning. Let me make sure I get the right clip here. Yes, in this clip.
Let me start with this. So the president himself pins this on the Freedom Caucus Club for Growth Heritage Foundation. So essentially conservative interest groups and the most conservative caucus in the House, a caucus you were a member of just 6 months ago.
Yeah, and I think there's probably plenty of blame to go around. As we sat over the last 2 days and tried to figure out what happened, I think what happened is that Washington won. I think the one thing we learned this week is that Washington was a lot more broken than President Trump thought that it was. What you have is the status quo wins, and unfortunately the folks back home lost. You could blame it on the Freedom Caucus if you want to, but there's also a lot of moderates. Charlie Dent will be on your show in a little bit, who are all
taking over the House.
Change Washington in a couple of days, last couple of hours, and the group would work to make the tells us is that.
So there, Director of the Office of Management and Budget from the Trump administration, as I said before, I showed the clip, blaming Washington, the place, rather than the actual people in the place, and not the Freedom Caucus that Nick Mulvaney used to belong to. I think that's kind of ridiculous. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. Before I move on to a couple Democrats reacting to this big loss for Trump and for the repeal and replace of Obamacare, I want to show what I thought was one of the more revealing clips as to why TRUMPCARE, or whatever you want to call it, failed. This is two Republicans, one from the right, Utah Senator Mike Lee, and then one from the left, Pennsylvania Congressperson Charlie Dent. I mean, from the left of the Republican Party, not from the actual left. They both did not support this bill for their own reasons, which, since they were both over on NBC's Meet the Press, this is sort of a back and forth as to whether health care is a right or not. That was the question that Chuck Todd asks. And I actually made a video about this. If you're watching as a live show, I haven't had a chance to put this in the video description, but I will put it in the video description as a link that you can watch. It's about the Michael Moore movie, Capitalism, a Love Story, and a mistake I think he made in that movie. And it talks about whether health care is a right, and whether FDR had an economic bill of rights, which I will talk a little more about after we watch that right-wing Republican versus center moderate Republican discussion of health care over in this clip.
The two of you that represent the sort of the ideological poles of the Republican Party, I want to ask you both whether you agree with the following quote from a colleague of yours, Senator Lee. It's Bill Cassidy, Republican from Louisiana. He has his own health care bill. He said this, that now, quote, there's widespread recognition that the federal government, Congress, has created the right for every American to have health care. Essentially, Senator Lee, he is saying the debate's over about whether government should be involved with this or not, and now it's just time to design a law that acknowledges this right, that people have a right to health care, and the government's got to figure out how to do it for them. Do you concur with that?
Insofar as he's talking about a federal right, rights are things the government can't do to you. Rights are not something that the government must do for you or provide for you. And insofar as he's suggesting that the federal government is the key, that an increased federal presence is somehow going to bring down the cost of health care, that's simply not true. And in fact, that's refuted abundantly by the last 7 years, by what's happened since Obamacare was passed, where this bill was passed and we brought the federal government into it with the promise that this would somehow make health care more affordable. It has had quite the opposite effect.
Congressman Dent, I'm going to guess that you probably are in more agreement with Senator Cassidy.
Well, I spoke with Senator Cassidy and Senator Collins at length. Senator Cassidy, from a very conservative state, Louisiana, I tend to agree that we have a national health care architecture now, flawed as it is. I voted against it, but we're going to have to work with it to try to make this system better, more market-oriented, patient-friendly, patient-centered. I think to a certain extent that debate has already been settled. We do have sort of a national health program. Our job is now to fix it and make it much better than it is today, because it's simply not working for too many Americans.
Well, Senator Lee, Congressman Dent, I'm going to leave it there, but I have a feeling that there's a divide here on the role of government that hasn't been bridged inside the Republican Party, and until that's done, we still may have this debate to go on and on and on. Gentlemen, I appreciate you coming on together. It's good to have you both.
Hey, thanks so much, Jeff.
You got it. When we come back.
Now, as you might expect, I actually kind of disagree with both those Republican viewpoints for different reasons, although I agree with them both to some extent. First, Senator Mike Lee from Utah was talking about whether health care was a right or not, and he said, well, a right is something the government can't do to you. It's not something that you get from the government. And he's talking about, positive rights versus negative rights. And in terms of constitutional rights, I agree with him. I don't think healthcare should be a right under the Constitution, because basically somebody has to pay for it. It requires enacting legislation. That's not what constitutional rights are supposed to be, which is, like I said before I showed the clip, an argument I make in this video I made a while back, pointing out an error in Michael Moore's movie Capitalism, a Love Story, about FDR's Economic Bill of Rights, which FDR did not believe should be a second Bill of Rights added to the Constitution, but should be enacted through legislation. And to that extent, I do believe healthcare should be a right. It should be a right in, a wealthy, industrialized country, that there should be legislation that everyone has healthcare coverage. It should be universal healthcare, a right of all people in a country like the United States, just like it is in all the other industrialized countries. So it should be a statutory right created by legislation. It just shouldn't be a constitutional right. So that's where I agree and disagree with Mike Lee. As for Charlie Dent, the moderate Republican, I do agree with him that there's a national architecture of healthcare created by Obamacare, but I disagree with him that the solution now is to make it more market-oriented. Actually, what we need is more of a public option and more get the profit motive more out of healthcare, not more into healthcare. So that's the part of Charlie Dent's statement that I disagree with. So I wanted to play that clip, and you can let me know what you think about that commentary while I get to the two Democrats who are responding to the big loss for the repeal and replace of Obamacare. First, here's the Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, talking to George Stephanopoulos about Donald Trump blaming Democrats for the loss of his repeal and replace of Obamacare, over in this clip.
Let's talk about the president first. He said you're the big loser.
Well, look, the bottom line is very simple, and that is, the president never called us once about this. They came on board with repeal, which they knew every Democrat would oppose, and no one believes that. But I would say this: we Democrats, provided our Republican colleagues drop, replace, and stop undermining the ACA, are willing to work with our Republican
friends. Right now, you
friends,
can make a proposal?
as long as they say no more repeal. That's a loser. 17% of Americans like TRUMPCARE. That's it. They didn't want it. And stop undermining ACA. And we'll work with them. We have ideas. They have ideas to try to improve Obamacare. We never said it was perfect. We always said we'd work with them to improve it. We just said repeal was off the table. And I just make one other point on this, George. For the president to say that he'll destroy it or undermine it, that's not presidential. That's petulance. Being petulant, not a president. And it's not going to work. The job of a president is to make Americans' lives better. And if he, out of anger or vengeance or whatever, starts undermining ACA, it's going to backfire on him because he's the president and the American people know he's in charge and they want him to make things better.
Well, you just heard Congressman Meadows right there. He says the repeal effort's not dead.
Well, it won't succeed. And, you know, there's one point we're missing here. The American people hated TRUMPCARE. The more they learned about it, the more they didn't like. And, you know, not only did we have a totally unified Democratic caucus from Bernie Sanders to Joe Manchin, but I want to salute all the people out there, the average people who called and wrote and picketed and protested. If they keep on this repeal path, they'll get nowhere. And it's mainly because if they want to do with what Mr. Meadows does, then all the moderates will jump off. It's, you know, they have 7 kids in the bed and they have enough covers for 5. So they ought to get rid of repeal, drop it. It's been a flop for them because of the substance of repeal, and work with us to improve it.
One of the things that unites Republicans is tax cuts, and I think we just heard some.
Now, one of the things I think is funny about that clip, I noticed especially on watching it for, you know, the third time, as I explained before, I watch most of these clips for the third time with the live viewers, because I watch it like the first time when I'm watching the show, and then the second time after I picked it out when I'm capturing it, and then the third time when I play it for you all during the broadcast. And that time, what kind of struck me finally after watching it the third time was that Chuck Schumer he's saying that what's really important is the policy, but he's actually talking almost completely about the politics. Now, can't really blame him because that was really the question that George Stephanopoulos asked him about who was to blame. But I thought that was kind of funny, especially because I was thinking about the next clip I'm going to show you, which is the Bernie Sanders clip. Dana Bash was guest hosting for Jake Tapper on CNN State of the Union, and she had him on and started off with this clip of Donald Trump, where Donald Trump is talking about how maybe there'll be some bipartisan solution to health care in the future. Sorry, I was just looking down at my clip list. And you'll see that Bernie Sanders actually agrees there may be some bipartisan bill where he would work with Donald Trump on bringing down prescription drug prices. But what I think is also important about this clip is he starts off talking a lot more about the policy, what Democrats should be saying they want, what they positively want to give people, what is good about universal health care. He also talks about Medicare for all and the public option, and I'll talk about that a little more with you after we watch this final clip on the big loss for Donald Trump on health care this week over here.
Looking for a win, he needs to build different coalitions, and that may just have to include Democrats.
We had bipartisan. I really think we could have a health care bill that would be the ultimate. And I think the Democrats know that also. And someday in the not too distant future, that'll happen.
But the question is, will Democrats actually come to the table? Joining me now is Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont. Senator, thank you so much for joining me. Now, the president, as you heard, is trying to blame Democrats for the GOP failure to repeal and replace Obamacare, but he also said that he'd be willing to work with you and Democrats in the Senate and House on a solution. So given that, and given the fact that you have long said that there are problems with Obamacare, and the president wants to work with you, but obviously doesn't want to go as far as you do, insurance for everyone, do you think that you can take your position and take his position, and you can actually pick up the phone and reach out to him and say, at least let's fix what's happening now?
Well, Dana, let me just begin by saying this. The bill that was defeated should have been defeated. It was a disastrous piece of legislation primarily designed to provide $300 billion in tax breaks to the top 2%, throwing 24 million people off of health insurance, raising premiums for older workers in a very, very significant way. It was defeated. The American people wanted it defeated, and I'm glad that we're able to accomplish that. Now, as you indicated, of course, Obamacare has serious problems. Deductibles are too high. Premiums are too high. The cost of health care is going up at a much faster rate than it should. Ideally, where we should be going is to join the rest of the industrialized world and guarantee health care to all people as a right. And that's why I'm going to introduce a Medicare for all single-payer program. Short term, this is what we can do. John Kasich was talking about chatting with the president about the high cost of prescription drugs. Well, you know what? I've introduced legislation that would allow pharmacists and distributors to buy lower cost medicine from around the world.
So let's start there. Is that something that you will not just introduce on the Democratic side of the aisle, but actually pick up the phone and call the White House and say, hey, this is something I know the president cares about too. Can we work together?
Absolutely.
You're going to do that?
President, well, right now, President Trump said a whole lot of stuff on the campaign trail. One of the things he talked about was lowering the cost of prescription drugs. There is wonderful legislation right now in the Senate to do that. President Trump, come on board. Let's work together. Let's end the absurdity of Americans paying by far the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs.
And what about the idea of broadly fixing?
So that's just a brief clip from the Bernie Sanders interview that Dana Bash did on CNN State of the Union this morning. There's a link down in the video description to the full CNN State of the Union program if you're interested in seeing the rest of that. Bernie Sanders also, I don't think he talked about the public option there, but he talked about the public option as the real solution to the lack of insurance choices. That, one of the talking points I've heard over and over again, if you've been watching the Sunday Clip Roundup, you've heard Republicans say over and over again that a third of counties, and I think it's five states, only have one choice. And of course, they always use states and counties as their measure because it lets them choose places where there aren't a lot of people, but there are a lot of Republicans. Where, as you know, Republicans are the majority. It's the big open spaces in the middle of the country, the counties that have very few people, and the states that have very few people. Those are the most Republican states, and that's also where they have few insurance options, and that's one of the reasons that the whole TRUMPCARE was hurting the Trump voters. But anyway, like I said, that was the last clip I want to show on the whole Obamacare issue. I thought, as I said before, Bernie Sanders did a lot better job of laying out what the Democrats should be saying they want to positively do in terms of health care, rather than the politics. You heard more from Chuck Schumer there, though I'm sure Chuck Schumer can talk more about the policy as well. But so the second and final topic I want to talk about is the ongoing Russia scandal. There's like more and more smoke. We're still waiting for the evidence of collusion, although one of the things that happened this last week was that the ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff, came out and said that there was more than just circumstantial evidence. And, as a lawyer, I know if it's not circumstantial evidence, that means direct evidence, which is something that I think it was Chuck Todd, can't remember the opposite of circumstantial evidence, in a question he's going to ask in a couple clips. But I wanted to show a couple introductory clips from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher. The first one involves Chris Hayes from the MSNBC show All In with Chris Hayes. He's been doing a bunch of different shows. He's on a book tour. I just bought his book. You can see, no, it's not this way. It's right over here, his new book. I put it up on the shelf, but I just got it and I haven't had a chance to read it. So don't ask me how it is yet, but I've heard it's a good book. And I've read almost all these books that are behind me. I haven't read this one, and I haven't had a chance to read this Trevor Noah book. All the other ones, sometimes I put the books up here when I get them before I read them, but I'm going to read it. That's one of the reasons I put them back there, is because that means that I have to read them, because I've displayed them as books that people can see that I'm sort of claiming to have read by putting them behind me. But I'm letting you know there are a couple back there I haven't read yet, but I'm gonna read it. But one of the interesting things about this next clip, I think, is it talks about the background of the Chris Hayes clip is the second clip. The first clip is actually the Matt Schlapp clip. He's the head of the American Conservative Union, where Donald Trump went and spoke recently. They had their big conclave, and it was one of the triumphant speeches that Donald Trump gave to his most ardent supporters, although Matt Schlapp has sometimes criticized Donald Trump, especially during the campaign, and Donald Trump wasn't always as popular. The year before, Donald Trump didn't even speak at the American Conservative Union because he wasn't very popular with that wing of the party. And you'll see Matt Schlapp is a little bit ambivalent about Donald Trump in some of his answers here. But I think then they talk about, this is, like I said, the first clip on the whole Russia thing, and they talk about the Trump claim that Trump Tower was wiretapped. And I think Bill Maher makes a good argument that Republicans are spending too much time carrying water for Donald Trump. I like his kind of joke at the beginning, and then they also talk about being egotistical and narcissistic at the end, which I promised earlier. And anyway, I'll talk about that clip after we watch it together over here.
But that's if they see, this is the damage I think he's doing to this country. The fact that he says something, and then we all have to scramble, not we all, your team, right, has to scramble to pretend that the Mad King actually saw a 12-foot bunny on the lawn. So that you have, what we saw was this guy, Devin Nunes. Now, he's the chairman of the Intelligence Committee. This was always bipartisan. This was the one place where bipartisan reigned, because we have a great country in the sense that the intelligence agencies, they're not just there on their own. They have to share their information. But we were smart. We said not the whole Congress, because they can't keep a secret. They can't. Okay, but they got to tell somebody. That's right. So it's the Intelligence Committee, just 6 or 8 people. He's head of that. Okay, so this week, he ran over to the White House with some bullshit that was a nothing burger. that Trump's name came up on incidental collection, not what Trump said, that he was wiretapped.
That's right.
And it probably wouldn't have if he didn't have Putin on speed dial.
But can I just bring up this incident?
They were tapping Russians. That's what they do. And his name came up. This is legal. This is normal. And he went over there to give Trump cover. See, this is what I'm talking about. The fabric of democracy, little tears. The Intelligence Committee, which was something that was bipartisan. Now we fucked that up. Now we ruined that. And
I
those little...
don't think we've ruined it.
Well,
I think
we haven't done it a lot of help.
They're going to come out with a report. It'll be a bipartisan report. And the FBI is going to come out with findings as well. And maybe we can go back to, there is maybe an area here that we do agree on, which is all of this incidental surveillance and all of this, they call it, just the common, ordinary thing where they pick up conversations. I'm troubled by that. I wasn't always troubled by that. I'm more troubled by that as I see how extensive this is. I don't think it's appropriate that they just pick up someone's conversation. We talk about a wiretap. They actually don't. Okay. Wiretapping is a very specialized thing, but the surveillance that goes on by our intelligence agencies is too broad.
Yeah, you loved it when Bush was president. Okay, but that's...
No, it's much broader now. We know because technology can get everywhere.
If we want to have that discussion about whether the spy agency should be doing that, we can. But that's not what this was about. Let's not pretend it is. We're trying to have an agreement on a real basis.
But we do agree on that.
Well, we agree that it should be looked at.
And it should be, they should go after narrow targets. And by the way, if those targets are members of the Trump team that had inappropriate contact with Russia, I'm absolutely fine with them being investigated. I think if they didn't do anything wrong, they want their names cleared. But if they did something wrong, the American people should know about it.
But there is I'm just saying, there is a problem when the president says some batshit thing that he does because of his ego. You would admit he's an egoist, right? An egomaniac?
I think he has a healthy ego.
No, I'm talking... An egomaniac.
I'll use my own
words.
words.
What about a narcissist?
Everyone in politics is a narcissist.
Stop.
Can you see this?
Okay. And it goes on. You can, like I said, there's a link down in the video description to the entire Matt Schlapp interview on HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher, available free on YouTube on the Real Time channel. That's why you saw the video I just showed was kind of superimposed on the video player from a YouTube page, so you can go watch the whole thing. One reason I played that at the beginning of this Russia topic is I thought Bill Maher, excuse me, actually did the best job of summarizing the whole Devin Nunes incident better than any of the corporate news media. He went into like all the things Devin Nunes did and why it was so ridiculous that he went and briefed the White House. There are even more things, if you've been paying attention, where he was like in an Uber and like with an aide, and he like stepped out of the car and disappeared and was picked up by people, forces unknown, and most people say taken to the White House and briefed by people at the White House about some of this incidental collection. That the one thing that Bill Maher got wrong in his summary there was he said that the incidental collection that Devin Nunes was talking about in his press conference had to do with Russia, but one thing Devin Nunes made clear was it wasn't Russia. It had to do with something else, which, I don't know, could it be Turkey? Because, of course, Michael Flynn was supposedly involved in this whole conspiracy to kidnap what's the cleric's name in Pennsylvania? Gulen, I think, is the Turkish cleric who Erdogan, the prime minister, the head of Turkey, who's becoming increasingly authoritarian, he wants the Trump administration to extradite, and apparently Michael Flynn was involved in some conspiracy to like kidnap him and rendition him to Turkey, or that's what I've been hearing on MSNBC. That I guess we'll find out for sure as more facts come out from the House Intelligence Committee investigation. I'll have more on that in just a minute. But having shown that analysis from Matt Schlapp and Bill Maher about the whole controversy about the wiretapping, one thing I wanted to point out is they're both talking, Matt Schlapp is now a new convert to the idea that NSA surveillance is a bad thing, and there's, they target foreigners, but the incidental collection is much too wide. And one of the things I talked about last week was a video I made back in 2008 when the FISA Amendments Act was passed, and Barack Obama, then a candidate for president, actually voted for it, and I criticized him at the time, even though I was supporting him for president. And one of the things it did was it made it a lot easier to target foreigners but still pick up this incidental collection, even when the foreigners were in the United States, or when one end of the conversation was in the United States. And that didn't used to be true under the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. So I will also put a link down in the video description, if you're watching this as a recorded show, to my video from 2008, which is like ACLU opposes government surveillance, whether it's President Bush, Obama, or McCain, or something like that. I can't even remember the name of the video, but I'll put it down there for those of you who are watching the recorded show if you're interested in that, and more information about the section of the FISA Amendments Act that makes it easier to target foreigners but pick up incidental collections of a collection of Americans. And the next clip I want to show, that was about the Devin Nunes news. This is about what happened with James Comey this week, where he actually revealed that since July, the Trump campaign, Trump world, has been under investigation for collusion or ties with Russia. And why he was so public about the investigation of Hillary Clinton but not the investigation of Donald Trump, I don't know. But this is the clip where Chris Hayes actually gives his theory about James Comey, and kind of like that last clip, it also involves the word narcissism, which I will discuss with you after we watch that clip together over here.
So you have faith that he's going to come through?
Yes, sir.
Because he was our hero.
Plot twist.
Remember back when with Bush by the hospital bed?
That was
we all loved.
That was why he got. It was the hospital bed moment that made him the director of the FBI. That was the towering integrity and everything.
Is he that guy?
No.
Is he the Hillary guy? Is he going to go back to the hospital bed guy?
The thing that everybody says about James Comey, that he's very, very talented, that he inspires tremendous loyalty. They also say he has just an absolute towering conception of himself, and I mean he's literally very tall, but a certain kind of moral narcissism. Like, he is very into James Comey being the guy, the only straight shooter in a crooked town, and I think that was the whole brand that he built for himself out of the hospital bed moment. It's the reason he was director of the FBI. It was the brand that he cloaked himself in when he came out and completely violated every policy to give his own opinions on Hillary Clinton's email practices when he was choosing not to indict her. It was the reason that he said he wrote the letter. And so there's some part of me that wonders if the story ends with him trying to find redemption essentially through this investigation.
Okay.
I think he's a good guy. I'm sorry. I really do. I know it's a plot twist. I know it's hard for liberals. I believe he's a good guy.
I want to believe that too.
But good guy.
I got to cling to something, and I'm still clinging to that tall man.
I believe he's very tall. I think he followed the law. I really do.
So I think that's a really interesting theory from Chris Hayes from MSNBC's All In with Chris Hayes. Like I said, no, it's not on this side. It's over. His book is there that I haven't read yet. Although I have to say I do watch his show almost every day. I miss a few days, maybe once a week, but depending on what's going on. But that's one of the show, MSNBC. I watch that show and Rachel Maddow on MSNBC, not as news shows, but as news commentary shows, because I find their insights, usually I find the shows informative and insightful. But I noticed a couple weeks ago I had said all these good things about Rachel Maddow, and then she overhyped that story about Trump's tax returns, and I felt a little sheepish about that, but I still am a fan of Rachel Maddow. In today's corporate media environment, can you really blame someone for clickbaiting their show one day? And she's actually doing really well in the ratings, so at least we're not sick of her winning yet. At least I'm not sick of her winning. Although I'm still waiting to get sick of Trump winning. Getting back to the Trump administration and this next clip. The thing I thought was really interesting about, before I get to the next clip, the thing I thought was really interesting about the Chris Hayes theory that Comey may actually turn around. They were talking about the bedside moment. That's from the George W. Bush administration, where they tried to get the warrantless wiretapping. The FISA Amendments Act from 2008 actually made it legal to do this wiretapping that was illegal under the George W. Bush administration. And there was a point where they were trying to get the acting attorney general, then James Comey, to reauthorize this warrantless wiretapping that was illegal, and he wouldn't do it, so they went to John Ashcroft's bedside. I think he was getting his pancreas removed or something. I can't remember the exact details of his illness, and then John Ashcroft refused to sign off, and so James Comey stopped warrantless wiretapping for like a week or two of the George W. Bush administration, and they pared it back, and then eventually it was actually authorized by a bipartisan act of Congress, including a vote from Barack Obama and the FISA Amendments Act. So anyway, that's the background there, and I think it's possible maybe he is a moral narcissist, as Chris Hayes said, and there will be some end to this story where James Comey is the hero who, brings down the Trump administration for its collusion with Russia to prove he didn't throw the election to Donald Trump with his, in the last 10 days of the election saying he's reopening the investigation. Because what he did, even when he didn't indict Hillary Clinton, that was totally against Justice Department policy. You're just supposed to say, no indictment, not enough evidence to indict, but he gave this whole press conference criticizing Hillary Clinton's email practices, and it was just ridiculous. And why he did that, but didn't say anything about Donald Trump and the investigation to his ties with Russia, I have no idea. But you can let me know what you think down in the comment section. And now I'm going to get to some of the actual news clips. This next one, this is Adam Schiff, the ranking member, a Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, and he starts off talking about, whether the big Republican talking point that the real crime here is that people are getting unmasked who have been unmasked means that in this incidental collection of foreign intelligence, U.S. citizens or even U.S. persons, which is like anyone who resides in the U.S., that's supposed to be masked out, and supposedly people are getting unmasked. That's how General Michael Flynn lost his job as National Security Advisor, because he got unmasked as talking to the Russian ambassador. And so here's Adam Schiff explaining why it's not always wrong to unmask people. And then by the end of this, this is a fairly long clip, because he eventually gets around to talking about what Devin Nunes did and how he has to decide whether he's going to be a congressional investigator or a tool of the Trump administration. And I will discuss that after we watch that clip together. Almost 5 minutes long. John Dickerson doing some okay questioning, I think, on CBS's Face the Nation this morning here.
Start with something Chairman Nunes of the committee said. He suggested that some private citizens had been unmasked as a part of a surveillance effort. If, in fact, that were true, that would be a big deal, wouldn't it?
Well, it all depends. There are perfectly appropriate circumstances to unmask the names of people. In fact, that's done quite often, and the standard is whether the unmasking of those names is necessary to determine the significance of the intelligence. So unmasking is not at all unusual. The question is, was it done appropriately? And here the problem, John, is that none of us have seen what the chairman is talking about. This evidence was taken apparently directly to the White House, which creates another issue because, of course, it's associates involved in the Trump campaign who are in part the subject of what we're investigating. That's the bigger problem, I think, than the chairman's claim. Certainly, we want to oversee the minimization processes, make sure they're operating correctly, but we can't have a credible investigation if one of the members, indeed the chairman, takes only information he has seen to the White House and doesn't share it with his own committee.
And so he has not shared that with you, including his claim that the president himself, when he was a candidate, was caught in the surveillance. Is that right?
Yes, he hasn't shared it with me, and to my knowledge, and you can check with my colleague, Mr. Gowdy, I don't think he shared it with anyone on the committee, so we're all quite in the dark on this. And, we, I think, suffered really two serious blows to the integrity of the investigation this week. One with that unilateral trip to the White House, but the other with the cancellation of an open hearing that was scheduled for Tuesday with Directors Clapper, Brennan, and Sally Yates, the former Deputy Attorney General. I think her testimony in particular would have shed a lot of light for the public on the whole Michael Flynn chapter, and perhaps that's something the White House did not want to see. I can't otherwise account for why we would have this abrupt cancellation of a hearing that both the chair and I had committed to doing.
Well, the chairman's argument is that the cancellation of that hearing was necessary because he wanted to have other closed-door testimony beforehand before having that next hearing. That seems like a reasonable idea.
You know, it certainly would be reasonable if that were the justification, but of course, the one doesn't preclude the other. We welcome the return of any of the witnesses in closed session, but their testimony doesn't necessarily preclude us doing an open hearing that we had already agreed with. The witnesses were prepared to do. They were more than willing to do. So I really don't think that's the justification. Indeed, we got word that they were trying to close the open hearing even before they suggested an alternate hearing.
You suggested in a tweet that the chairman was trying to, quote, choke off public information. What evidence did you have for that?
Well, I think that the hearing that we had on Monday, where the director of the FBI testified for the first time that there's an ongoing investigation of potential coordination between the Trump campaign and the Russians, as well as the disclosure by the director that there was no factual basis for the president's accusation of wiretapping by his predecessor. I think that hearing went so poorly for the White House that there was a lot of pushback in doing a second open hearing. Honestly, John, because the other explanations simply don't make sense. We could always have directors Comey and Rogers come back at any time. There's no necessity of having them come back before the open hearing. I think that was merely an effort to camouflage the true object here, which was the closure or the cancellation of the hearing with Sally Yates. But let me just make a... Yeah.
Well, I just want to interrupt briefly, Congressman, because basically what it sounds like you're saying is that the chairman of the committee is a tool of the White House he's investigating. And if you're saying that, how can this committee get its work done?
Well, look, I think the chairman has to make a decision whether to act as a surrogate of the White House, as he did during the campaign and the transition, or to lead an independent and credible investigation. I hope he chooses the latter. The country really needs to have an independent, credible investigation in the House. And we had that up until and through Monday. Where I think that the House process went off the rails was with that venture by the chairman to the White House. You simply can't run a credible investigation that way. I'm going to do everything I can to get this back on track, and I implore our chairman and the speaker to rededicate themselves to a serious and bipartisan investigation. We know that Russia was involved in hacking our democracy. We know that the evidence or information is sufficient to warrant a FBI investigation of this. We're trying to do as much of this as we can in the public eye transparently. Obviously, some of it will have to be done in closed session, but it really demands both parties work together on this. We've made every effort to do so, but we need the chairman to decide that's what his object is as well.
Congressman.
So that's pretty strong stuff from the Democratic ranking member on the House Intelligence Committee, saying that the chair of the House Intelligence Committee, Devin Nunes, has to decide whether or not he's a tool of the Trump administration. I didn't mean to just call him a tool, but sometimes I think from some of the clips I've showed of him in the past that he is kind of a tool. But whether he's a tool of the Trump administration or whether there's actually a separation of powers and he's really investigating, and I think Adam Schiff laid it out pretty well there. And that was the 1 5-minute worthwhile clip I thought I would show from Face the Nation. Before I get to a couple Republican alternative fact views, I guess, on the whole Russian scandal, I'm going to have Roger Stone, a Trump associate who's been implicated, something from him, and then this Reince Priebus clip that is almost political comedy for reasons I'll explain before I show that as the final clip tonight. But first, having shown Adam Schiff there really explaining why bipartisan investigation in the House of Representatives Intelligence Committee is almost impossible unless there's a big shift from Devin Nunes. I want to show a couple clips from the ranking Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee, Mark Warner. This is from NBC's Meet the Press, and I think one of the pundits on Meet the Press said that Mark Warner is going to be the Democratic nominee. I don't know if that's true or not, but for in 2020 to run against Trump. But one of the things I think is true is what he says about what Devin Nunes did here, and he's responding. These are two quick clips. This is the ranking Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee responding to the behavior of the chair of the House Intelligence Committee this week over in this clip.
You had the House Intelligence Chairman, Devin Nunes, claim that he has now seen some raw intelligence reports that perhaps confirm that that there was at least some inadvertent surveillance of folks connected to the Trump campaign. Have you seen any of this material? What is he referring to?
I am totally mystified by what Mr. Nunes has said. And I've talked to my chairman, Richard Burr. He doesn't know. I've talked to Democrats, Republicans on the committee. I think it's fairly mystifying, if not outrageous, that he make these claims, then goes down and briefs the White House. And I know Adam Schiff, the lead Democrat, still wants to keep the investigation bipartisan. I don't think Mr. Schiff even knows today what those documents are.
We have talked a couple of times, and you have...
Mystifying and outrageous. So I don't know what Devin Nunes is going to do to make up for this, but I think he's definitely lost his credibility unless he does something to bring it back. And I want to show one more quick clip from Senator Mark Warner. This is talking about what Representative Adam Schiff said that was sort of explosive earlier in the week. You'll see a clip of it, I think, or at least a summary from Chuck Todd, that there's more than circumstantial evidence. There's direct evidence, although, as I mentioned earlier, Chuck Todd, I think, can't remember that the opposite of circumstantial is direct, which, of course, being a former criminal defense attorney, I know circumstantial and direct evidence pretty clearly, but not Chuck Todd over in this clip.
As you know, you brought up Adam Schiff. He's the ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee. He said to me earlier this week, he said there is more than just circumstantial evidence, and that there is some evidence of collusion that's going to come out. Is that
I'm
your
going to simply
contention?
say what I said at the outset. Weeks ago, when I was first getting started to this, I said this is the most important thing I've ever worked on. With what I know now, I doubly believe that. This is the most serious effort. It has to be done bipartisan. We have to get the facts out to the American people.
You keep saying there's a lot more smoke.
There's a lot more smoke.
You think the fire's there?
Listen, time will tell. But what we do know is the Russians massively intervened, and they're doing the same thing right now in France and Germany.
And before I let you go, Neil Gorsuch, is it worth?
So lots of smoke, maybe there's fire, and that's sort of a summary of something that Mark Warner said earlier in the interview, that in a clip I didn't take, about how this is the most important thing he's ever done, investigating Trump ties to Russia. So that means he's seen something that's really important, or he's hyping it. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. And before I finish, I'm going to show a couple clips of Republicans trying to defend the Trump administration. First, this is kind of a preview of something that should be pretty humorous. Roger Stone, the dirty trickster and longtime Trump associate, trying to explain his, like, many Russia associations and how it's all not true, what's been in the press. And this is a preview of what we may see in open hearings before one of the intelligence committees in the second to last clip. This is on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos this morning over here.
On August 8th, Roger Stone, a longtime Trump political advisor and self-proclaimed political dirty trickster, boasts in a speech that he has communicated with Assange, and that more documents would be coming, including an October surprise. In the middle of August, he also communicates with a Russian cutout Guccifer II, and authors a Breitbart piece denying Guccifer's links to Russian intelligence. Then later in August, Stone does something truly remarkable, when he predicts that John Podesta's personal emails will soon be published. Trust me, he says, it will soon be Podesta's time in the barrel.
That is the top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, raising questions at Monday's hearing about Trump associates and Russian interference in last year's campaign. And we're joined now by the man he was talking about, a longtime friend and advisor to Donald Trump, political strategist Roger Stone, who's written a new book, The Making of the President, 2016. Mr. Stone, thank you for joining us this morning. I know you volunteered to appear and answer the questions of the House Intelligence Committee. Have they accepted your offer, and have you asked for or received any type of immunity in exchange for testifying?
They have only confirmed that they received our offer to testify voluntarily, and I have requested that be in a public session because the three things that the gentleman from California, who's largely full of Schiff, said are incorrect. I never made any reference to John Podesta's email. There were a dozen stories about his business
said, trust me, it will soon be Podesta's time in the barrel. That was your tweet. And 2 months later, the email came
Correct, but George, does it say hashtag WikiLeaks, hashtag Assange? He said Stone predicted that his emails would be hacked. No, I didn't. I never said anything of the kind.
We know that there's an active FBI investigation now as well. Have you been contacted by the FBI, you or your lawyers? Any requests for an interview or information?
I have not. What I think you refer to is the surveillance that I'm under that was referred to on page 1 of the New York Times on January 20th. This is on the basis of no probable cause and no evidence whatsoever. The communication he refers to with Assange is through a mutual friend, an intermediary, as it were. I didn't admit this, I announced it. Secondarily, as I have said, the reference to Podesta is general, it is not specific, and by the way, he does have his time in the barrel shortly thereafter.
You have also clouded the Russia investigation. How does President Trump get out from under it?
Well, let's have this testimony, George. In other words, you have a bunch of congressmen here who I believe have defamed me. I saw demagoguery, fear-mongering, red-baiting, and half-truths, in many cases just flat-out lies. In America, we're supposed to have a chance to see the evidence against us and face our accusers. I'm very anxious to do that. If Mr. Page and Mr. Manafort do the same thing, frankly, I think the whole Russian meme, which really starts as a Clinton campaign press release, is finally put to bed. There is no collusion, and at least none that I know about, in Donald Trump's campaign for president.
We will be watching the hearings. We will be watching for your testimony. Mr. Stone, thanks for joining us this morning.
So, did that guy come across as like a total weasel? He seemed like a total weasel to me. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. I especially think, as someone who makes dad jokes, that the whole, he's full of Schiff thing, that was like a total dad joke and not very funny, I have to say, as someone who likes comedy. That's the kind of barely funny joke I might make myself, but I don't think goes over well on national TV, and I don't know how he's going to play on these hearings if he actually testifies at the hearings. I think he will come across as a total weasel, but you can let me know what you think down in the comment section. And then this is the final clip of Reince Priebus talking about the president's tweet claiming that Obama wiretapped Trump Tower. And he says it's actually true. This is why I called it political comedy. The tweet is true as long as you realize Obama doesn't mean Obama, wiretap doesn't mean wiretap, and Trump Tower doesn't mean Trump Tower. But other than that, his claim that Obama wiretapped Trump Tower is true. That's what he's arguing, as you can see when he's talking to Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday this morning over here.
I want to do this quickly if we can, because we're running out of time. Let's turn to the House investigation of alleged links between Russia and the Trump campaign, and also the allegations that the Obama administration swept up surveillance and leaked it to try to undercut the Trump presidency. Let's do a lightning round here.
Okay.
Quick questions, quick answers.
By the way.
I promise, these are going to be very easy.
Sure.
Does the president accept the conclusion from all sides that President Obama did not wiretap Trump Tower during the campaign, and is he ready to apologize?
Okay, well, first of all, the answer is no. But
no, he doesn't accept it.
No, and I don't accept it. I mean, the reality is that, number one, when people say Obama, I think it's very clear Obama administration.
No, I understand.
But number two, if you look at this headline, this is in the New York Times. It says wiretapped data. This is the New York Times. I think it's safe to say.
But that's nothing about Trump Tower.
You asked me a question. I think it's, well, people working in Trump Tower. I think it's safe to say.
No, it's nothing about Trump Tower. There were also surveillance of foreign targets.
I think it's safe to say that when people use the word wiretapped, they're not talking about the president, hooking up wires into a telephone.
Nobody's saying that.
The fact is, reports have come out for many, many months now that people on the Trump campaign transition team were surveillanced by potentially some intelligence group, whether they were inadvertently swept up, whether the names were unmasked. Chris, you don't know the full answer to that question, and I don't either.
That's a
fine
answer.
But if people in the Trump transition were unknowingly surveillanced and illegally unmasked on documents, which is what is being alleged out there, I think it's a big problem. And I think ultimately President Trump is going to be proven correct that this wasn't right.
So,
but I don't
that's now my second question. Does the president believe that this was a concerted effort by the Obama administration to sweep up this intelligence and to leak it to undercut the Trump presidency?
Well, there's two things there. One, the leaks are apparent. I mean, it's obviously all over the place. Right. I've been on your show before, and I've had people in my office at the highest levels of the intelligence community that volunteered. I didn't do anything wrong. They came into my office, shut my door, and told me that these stories about Russian contacts and collusion were ridiculous. So there are leaks out there that are injuring the president. It's wrong, and people should be prosecuted. Now, as to whether or not, to the first part of your question, that there's some sort of broad conspiracy, there's potentially something very wrong here. But I'm not going to go any further than that, other than to say that I think the documents that the intelligence committees have apparently asked for from all of these different agencies that they're collecting and reviewing will tell the story.
I got one last question for you again.
So, like I said, I think that was pretty funny where he explained the Trump tweet was true as long as you agree that all the parts of it were not what were actually in the tweet. I also like the way he used the made-up word surveillanced instead of the word surveilled, which I think is the actual word. But I'm way over time. I have to finish up. If you want to support my videos, you can become one of my patrons on Patreon by clicking on the link down in the video description. I noticed I got a new $30 pledge right before the show started, so I appreciate all of you who support me that way. Or you can just give me a thumbs up or give me a supportive comment down in the comment section. Thanks for the live viewers who showed up, more than 350 at one point, I think. So that's the show for tonight, and I'll be back next week, hopefully a little bit earlier. And until next week, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the